Welcome, everybody. And first up, some library news. First off, thank you for joining us tonight for our second in a three-part series with SF Neon and the Tenderloin Museum, our neighbors. Tonight will be a Neon-Matchbook typography presentation presented by Stephen Coles, who is part of the Letterform Archive. And now library news. So it's summer stride still. We are doing all adult programming virtually up until August 31st. We have a program that's celebrated under the summer stride umbrella. It's not just for kids. So do your 20 hours reading, get your iconic San Francisco Public Library tote bag, and join us all summer long. We want to welcome you to the unceded the Ohlone tribal people and acknowledge the many Ramaytush Ohlone tribal groups and families as the rightful stewards of the lands in which we reside in our San Francisco Bay Area. Our library is committed to uplifting the names of these lands and community members from these nations with whom we live together. We're going to learn more about first-person culture and rights. The document that I share, the chat link that I put in there has a list of reading and resources on these topics. Some literary campaigns we have coming up at the library. Total SF, who is part of Chronicles team, Heather Knight, Peter Hartlow, book club with us, and together we curate a book when we have the authors. So August 24th, we have The End of the Golden Gate, Writers on Loving and Sometimes Leaving San Francisco, featuring Henry and Gary Kamaya. So come by for that. And then November and February are slated for the Corrette Auditorium. So maybe we can do it. San Francisco Public Library has a bi-monthly reading campaign called On the Same Page. It's been happening for many years. So August, we are celebrating Jacqueline Woodson and her book, Red at the Bone. Jacqueline Woodson is typically a children's novelist, a YA novelist, and she will be in the virtual library August 12th talking about her youth-focused books. On Saturday, we have a film screening and filmmaker panel following the film. The film is The Prison Within, and this coincides with our Jail and Reentry Services Department. San Francisco Public Library is very proud of the work we do with our jails and reentry. We serve all of the jails west of Mississippi for male reference, so pretty intense job, and it's a small team, so we are just, I can't promote them enough. Please come check out this film. This is based in our neighbor, San Quentin Prison, and about social reform and social justice programs. On August 3rd, we have Cheney Kwok and Oscar Villalone in conversation. And then Sunday, August 8th, we have author Carla Hubner talking about her book, Magnetic Women, Toyin and the Surrealist Erotic. It is going to be a hot one, so come on by. And then our third and final Summer Stride event, hopefully our final event with Tenderloin and SF Neon. We have Jim Van Buskirk, who is also one of ours, a past librarian here at San Francisco Public Library, and he will be talking about celluloid and San Francisco. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Al Barna and Randall and Homan of SF Neon.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here at the library, and
yeah, you've got some great programs lined up.
Yeah. So yeah, join us for Cinematic Neon. That's the last Neon event. But tonight we're really excited to be working with Stephen Coles. We met Stephen the first time we visited the Letterform Archive. They've got a new place he's going to tell you about. And we've been partnering for years now with Katie Conry, Executive Director of the Tenderloin Museum. The museum's our Neon home. And Katie, we'll let you get us rolling.
Hello, my name is Katie Conry. I'm the Executive Director of the Tenderloin Museum. The Tenderloin Museum opened in 2015 with the mission of uncovering the lost history of the Tenderloin neighborhood, as well as celebrating the vibrant present-day community that's there. And we do so through historical exhibitions, an art gallery, walking tours, and weekly public programming. And we are currently open 10 to 5, Tuesday through Sunday, with walking tours at 1 p.m. every Saturday. So come see us. And as Randall said, the Tenderloin Museum is the fiscal sponsor of San Francisco Neon, and they are our long-term collaborators and friends. And together we've collaborated on neon art shows, public programming, walking tours, and we have an initiative with the city to restore neon signs in the Tenderloin neighborhood called Tenderloin Neon A to Z. So in 2019, we published the Matchbook. Better. So this collection of matchbooks from the Tenderloin neighborhood from like the early 1900s through the 1950s. So we published the book and we did an exhibition, temporary exhibition and public program series. And we really discovered that you could learn a lot about history through the aesthetics of the past. And I would describe matchbooks as the intersection of design art, advertising art, and nightlife history. And I would say the same about neon signs. So the connection between the two of them was immediately obvious to me. And the Tenderloin Museum collaborated with San Francisco Neon throughout the exhibition on public programming, including a version of this event, which we are excited to share with you today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Stephen Coles.
Hi, well, actually, we're going to go to SF Neon first.
Okay, we'll get this order straight. All right, so as Katie said, we're SF Neon. Our mission is to preserve the neon landscape and enhance that in San Francisco, which also, all these old neon signs really point to small historic businesses, and that's the deep connection for us. There you see the top of the Hotel Jefferson and Jim Rizzo working on that. And that's our most recent restoration project in the Tenderloin, just a block away from the museum. And what do we have next, Stephen? Oh, our books.
Yeah.
So we like to publish books about neon. If you need any more books for your neon bookshelf, you can get these at the library. Thank you, SFPL, but we've got them at sfneon.org too. So
Yeah, and you won't have to return it.
yeah, so it's your choice. But we love doing these books and just doing more neon education about this really special type of light, signage, and art, graphic design. Really neon essentially makes a dull street a vibrant street, and that's why we need to hang on to it. Do we have anything else, Stephen?
Nope.
Okay, we're ready for you.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to collaborate with SF Neon and Tenderloin Museum. Letterform Archive is my day job. I'm an associate curator at this kind of crazy small library slash museum now in the Dog Patch, and we're a nonprofit center for design, and we have this incredible collection of everything to do with lettering and typography. And we've just moved to a new space in the Dog Patch, in the American Industrial Center. We'll be opening up to the public with our first exhibition in that new space in October, hopefully. But this is just to give you a sense of what the archive does. We try to give people an idea of the history of written communication and the art form of the letter through these tours of our collection. And these tours include tables of original artifacts from a cuneiform tablet to Gutenberg Bible leaf, all the way up to psychedelic posters and type specimens and even current work. So that is the perspective from which I'm talking today, is about the letter forms and the typography of matchbooks and also a little bit about the Neon as well. And then that's my day job. And then I also help run a website called Fonts in Use and another one called Typographica. And if you're interested in those, you can go to stephencoles.org and learn about those. But we'll start out the evening talking about matchbooks and what makes them unique. I think one really cool thing about this, some people have asked when we first announced this program, what's the connection between matchbooks and Neon? And I like to think of it as Neon being the largest form of advertising for a lot of these venues that we'll talk about tonight, and matchbooks were the smallest form. So we're covering these two very typographically rich media forms that both kind of draw people into a venue, a restaurant, a bar. So matchbooks are really the simplest form of advertising. For the most part, they're a single cardboard covering, first manufactured in 1892 and really peaked in the mid 20th century as they became cheaper to produce and there were more and more kinds of venues to advertise. Another interesting thing to think about is those who collect matchbooks are often called voluminists, which I think is a great word, which means lover of light. And there are all of these other fun terms. So, if I were a matchbook guy, I would know all of these, and we'll talk about some of them today. Matchbook vocabulary is fascinating. There are hundreds of terms that only collectors know, and I want to apologize in advance to any collectors who are in the audience tonight, because there are times that I don't use the correct lingo for those who are really into matchbook collecting. And I understand what it's like when people don't use the correct lingo, because typographers have the same kind of bugaboos. But we'll learn about a few of these things tonight. And this matchbookpro.org is a great place to learn about some of these. It's been a good resource for me. Another thing that I think it's good to kind of understand is when we talk about these matchbooks and the neon signs is the difference between type and lettering. We often hear these two terms intermixed, but they are distinguishable. They're two different kinds of disciplines and different media. Type is made from pre-manufactured letters. So those could be made out of metal or wood or film or digital files, as we use today. And those pre-manufactured letters work as a system. So they're designed to work in any order, any letter you put in any order. But they're also, even though this is kind of changing now with digital type, it's mostly a static kind of medium in that you're taking something that somebody else has already made and putting it, building up a word or a phrase or a logo or a matchbook or a neon sign if it's made out of type with those pre-manufactured letters or a font. Whereas lettering is different. It's usually drawn or manufactured or written or built by hand or whatever tool you're using on the spot for that moment. So in that way, it's more intuitive. You're not working with pre-manufactured letters. You're making those letters on the spot to fit in that particular word or phrase in the best way possible. And so most of what we'll look at tonight is lettering. It's an example of taking letters and drawing them or writing them or building them with neon to really fit that sign or that matchbook cover. And that's how it's different from just typing something out with a font. And I think a really easy way to help you understand those differences is that type is kind of like Lego. It's like building blocks. You're working with pre-manufactured blocks and you're building something with them. And that can be really useful if you have those pre-fabricated tools. But lettering is like clay, where you can form it and shape it into any kind of piece of artwork that you need it to be. A little piece of an example from Letterform Archive's collection, which helps you kind of see the source of a lot of the lettering that we will look at today, is the Speedball Textbook Archive. Speedball Textbooks have been and still continue to be a huge resource for lettering artists, for calligraphers. They were formed by Rossef George, who was this lettering artist who helped invent a pen that made it easy to do lettering. And in his brilliance, his marketing mind said, well, why don't we also create a manual, a how-to textbook, which helps you understand how to do lettering using the pens that we make. So we have the archives from Rossef George in our collection, and you can see the original artwork for these textbooks, which are still in print. I think it's now in its 25th edition or 30th edition, something like that. And the lettering that was used, or that the Speedball pen became known for, is what we call low contrast lettering. So that's where you have a round tip on that pen, and that makes it simpler to draw or write letters because you don't have to think about where are the thick and the thin bits in each word or each letter. And so that helped a lot of people really learn lettering skills, and it was a way a lot of people trained. And it also helps define the way that a lot of these letters look. They have this really kind of friendly, round-ended style to them. And just as an example, here is a matchbook in which you see this kind of Speedball pen lettering in use. But the Speedball pens came in a lot of different nibs, and you can do other things with them, and that's all part of that whole collection of Speedball. And we'll see examples of these kind of styles as well: serif Romans and casual scripts, and even formal kind of calligraphic scripts like this one. Another thing to understand about matchbooks and where they come from and how they're made is you have custom designs and you have stock designs. And stock designs are essentially the matchbook manufacturer's pre-made designs that have a bunch of patterns and illustrations. And as a client, you could come into the matchbook manufacturer and say, look, I don't have a lot of money. I don't want to do something custom. Just give me something with a girl on it, or a bottle of beer, or a martini glass. And they have a bunch of pre-made designs for you. These are some examples of the companies that made matchbooks that are represented in the collections that we'll show today. And here's an example of a stock design. It's very apparent that this is a stock design when you look at the restaurant name. This is presumably, a Chinese or other Asian restaurant, and yet it's kind of a generic mid-century, assumedly white family having having dinner and having probably turkey and potatoes. So this is an example of where a stock design maybe didn't do the best job. But here is something that maybe is, a stock design, and probably a stock design because it's using a pretty generic phrase. You'll enjoy our congenial atmosphere, and it's using some pretty generic imagery. But at the same time, it's a little bit more appropriate for the use because this is for a bar. And then here's a very common style of stock design, which is known among voluminists as girlies. And you can imagine the kind of clientele that might come to some of these bars, and this was a way to make them grab a matchbook and take it with them. And so you'll often see these kind of pinup girls in a lot of the matchbooks from this era. And there are many, many, many of them. Most of what we'll look at, though, are not girlies. We're going to be looking at custom matchbooks tonight. Finally, one more, just an example of how generic can you get. This is, very, very run-of-the-mill stock design. And at the same time, here's something that's very custom. This is obviously the Ambassador Cocktail Lounge said, we want our own lettering, our own slogan in this design, and we want an illustration of our building in the design as well. So it's very customized. You'll often see buildings in these matchbooks because I think of it as being The neon sign drew you to the bar and brought you in, and you spent some time there, and you had a good time, and then you left with your matchbook, and that matchbook was your reminder of where you had been when you wake up the next day and wonder, oh, what was that cool spot I went to? Oh, I got a picture of it right here on my matchbook. And here's another really example of something that could be stock, actually, but it's a really beautifully designed stock design. You know, even though that this is a very generic phrase, having something that's illustrated with multiple colors, you know, more than one color was an example of a matchbook that was, you know, somebody had spent some money on, and the beautiful lettering here, that all kind of added to it. Even if this is not a custom design, it was a kind of special stock design. Another thing I love about matchbooks and why I think other people are drawn to this era of printing is just how clean and sterile all of our digital design has become today. You know, there are even little scripts and plugins for Photoshop and things like that to add some grit and dirt and imperfection to your design, and so that you can make it feel like it has the charm of the printing of yesteryear. And I think a lot of people relate to this. They want to have something that feels either analog or handmade, or at least that it came from another time and has a history to it, rather than something that's very perfect and clean to the effect that it doesn't have a personality. And you can see evidence of this kind of printing, these printing effects that were you know, very coarse and rough in these matchbooks. When you look at this illustration of Wilbur Stump and the half toning of his portrait, from a distance it works okay, but as you zoom in, you see this really coarse half tone. And that half tone, these dots, that dot patterning, was a cheap way to get grayscale levels of gray into an illustration without adding another color. So this was a way that they could use a custom design, but only spend money on one color in this print and still get an effect of a photograph in this illustration. Plus, he's slightly terrific, which I think is a great slogan for the place. Yeah, so some quick neon facts. Do you want to speak to these really quickly, Alan and Randall?
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Matchbook 101. Yeah. A couple of things we like to say if you're not familiar with neon. We call it all neon, but actually there's two gases that get used in a neon sign. Neon is the red, argon is the blue. And this technology that being demonstrated by the tube bender in this photo hasn't really changed in 100 years. You still have a human being hold a glass tube over a fire and get it hot and bend it to a shape. And that shape might say luncheonette, which is really cool. So every single neon sign we'll see tonight, in fact, every neon sign you see anywhere, even open signs, beer signs, they're all made by hand and they can last. We'll talk about the Lipo Lounge later. It's been on Grant Avenue for 75 years, same sign. So I think that makes neon signs pretty green in terms of, you know, they're not throwaway plastic.
No,
so
they're sustainable.
We've got some great matchbooks and neon signs to talk about, and we'll throw some history, San Francisco history in there too.
Awesome. So we're going to take a quick tour through San Francisco, and we'll visit each of these neighborhoods. My thanks to Lara Serra for doing these illustrations for us for this for the map. And there's we're going to start in the Tenderloin. There are a lot of good reasons for that. Katie, do you want to just go over some of the great reasons why the Tenderloin is such a mecca for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think that preservation can be a really interesting mix of effort and neglect. And a lot of the economic development in San Francisco has passed by the Tenderloin. So many citywide kind of efforts to modernize that destroyed a lot of neon signs that affected nearly every other neighborhood pretty devastatingly have not really affected the Tenderloin in the same way. And as a result, we have more neon signs than any other neighborhood. And some are not necessarily in the best shape, but with support and sustained effort from the city and San Francisco Neon and the Tenderloin Museum, the Tenderloin is really poised for this restoration effort.
Fantastic. So let's look at some of the matchbooks and the neon signs from the neighborhood. We're going to start out with Club Lafayette and the top drawer. Here's another example of, probably a stock design, but a cool pattern in here and 3 different colors in use. And the top drawer I just love because it's as obvious as an illustration as you can imagine for it, but it's just so charming that it really works.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about the top drawer. And that opened in about 1964, and it closed probably in 69 or early 70 because the building was actually demolished in 1970. But the photo on the left is the nightclub that preceded the top drawer. And that was the famous Blackhawk, which a great jazz mecca in the heart of the Tenderloin. It opened in 1949 and closed in 1963 after many years of battling the San Francisco Police Department, civic organizations who were looking for civic improvement and considered jazz and alcohol and that combination to be morally questionable. And the best thing about the Blackhawk was the acoustics in the bar itself. And a lot of legendary jazz performers not only performed there, but also recorded live albums. Some of the performers in the Blackhawks' heyday were people like Billie Holiday, Miles Davis, Chet Baker, Shelley Mann, Dizzy Gillespie, and even Charlie Parker.
Everybody.
And in 1959, Time Magazine did a profile on the club, and it was titled Success in a Sewer, which prompted co-owner Guido Cassiente to proudly respond by saying, "I've struggled for years to keep this place a sewer."
And if you look in the back there, you can see it says Hotel Lafayette. And that is where Club Lafayette was. That was our first matchbook.
Yeah, in fact, right above the gentleman's head in the photo, you can see the Club Lafayette sign.
Very cool. Another really lovely matchbook that I love from this area here, the Teakwood Room and Rose Room for cocktails. One of the things that you'll notice in a lot of these logos and other lettering that represented the venues is how much letters can do to give you the feeling of a place. And so what you see up in Teakwood Room, kind of a tiki style or something that may have been made with wood itself. Those letters feel like they're crafted out of wood. Another thing to kind of keep in mind as you look at these matchbooks and as you go through the city and look at neon signs is that cocktails style there at the bottom. It doesn't seem so special maybe, but it's something that is kind of interesting in the history of lettering arts. And I'm going to show it next to another sign that's actually in the Mission Districts. Some of you may know the Elbow Room, and that's where this sign comes from. We're not going to go over to the Mission tonight, but maybe on a future show we should do that. But this is a style that sign painters and other lettering artists call gas pipe letters. And gas pipe is really a nice, easy way to get up a sign or a piece of lettering because it's almost modular. You have this no contrast, monolinear form. You have straight sides on all the letters, and that makes it really easy to space. And it was just an easy first style of lettering for a lot of sign painters and show card writers and neon sign makers to learn because it has this kind of, these examples of ways to easily space a form. One thing though to note, and I'm sure that Randall and Al would tell you, is that corners are not as easy in neon. So the sharper the corner, sometimes the more difficult it is to bend. And that's another reason why these kind of rounded corners are a little bit better when you're working with straight-sided letter forms. And here's another example of that kind of style of gas pipe letter, but in a little bit more jaunty upper and lowercase mixed style for Bunny's waffle shops. And this gives us another opportunity to look at another printing technique. And that's the technique that is most common for matchbooks, even today, and that is flexography. And flexography differs from traditional offset printing. Offset printing is the kind of printing you'd see in a book or a magazine, in that the plate is flexible like rubber, and the substrate can be flexible as well, which makes it ideal for printing on all sorts of things like cardboard, which a lot of these matchbooks are, plastic bags, metal foils, cartons, labels, and it's primarily used today for packaging. So most everything you see in a grocery store today is flexo printed. That's kind of the colloquial term for flexography. But it was commonly used for matchbooks because it's really good for long print runs. In offset printing, you're using single sheets. But when they were printing matchbooks, they're doing it on a long roll of paper and then later cutting them, and that's much faster. It makes it a cheaper kind of a print. And then this little diagram here just kind of shows you how you can identify the difference between flexography and traditional offset lithography. You can see that right here in the Bunny's logo, that kind of halo effect around each of the letters. Katie's going to tell us a little bit about the why not. I just want to tell you that even the placement of letters can say everything you need it to say.
Well said. The Why Not opened in 1951 on 518 Ellis, and it was San Francisco's first leather bar. It closed shortly after it opened, and the leather scene moved to Soma, where it still is today. But we also have this featured in our matchbook on a coaster and on a pin. So if you're a fan of this image, we will see you at the Tenderloin Museum soon.
Awesome. Another nice matchbook in terms of lettering style and how the the kind of lettering can kind of give off an air of what the venue wanted to convey is the Olympic Hotel and this nice swashy, scrolly filigree in between the letters. And then we have a couple of images of signs here. I don't know if you have anything on these.
Yes, I do. We're looking at the Olympic Hotel itself. And in the photo on the right, which was made in 1948, you can see that the Olympic at that time had an enormous vertical sign that went down along the front of the building. That was removed probably sometime in the 50s. And also you see a 31 Balboa streetcar, or on a streetcar on the 31 Balboa line. And those were taken out of service in 1949, roughly a year after this photo was made, which had a huge impact on the Tenderloin itself. But in the postcard on the left, you get an example of a few different sign typologies. For instance, the TV sign with the free parking advertising. There used to be a lot of free parking advertising in the Tenderloin district. That's a thing of the past. That's a projecting sign, and the blue neon, where you just see the end of the word Olympic, that's a marquee sign. And on the front of that marquee sign, you have what's called a raceway sign. You see how the letter forms are extended above the marquee. They're supported at the base of the letters, but they give the impression of being freestanding. And you might ask, is that neon? It actually was neon under the, in the channel letters, neon was seated with a plexiglass facade over the front of the letters on the channel. So it was backlit neon filtered through plexiglass. All right, next slide.
Thank you. That's really interesting to know, because sometimes you assume that when you're looking at a flat plexiglass cover that there isn't neon involved there, but often there is.
Right. That neon was a primary source of income for sign makers and tube benders into the early 90s. Has since been supplanted with LED. It's actually more practical to use LED for backlighting than it is for neon. It won't last as long as neon, but that was a major part of sign makers' income at that time, and that disappeared, and things got a little tough for neon people in the late 80s and into the 90s.
And a lot of people think that LED is better than neon. Well, we don't agree, because LED can only shine light in one direction. Neon has that 360 round tube glow, and there's just really no comparison, in my opinion.
I agree. So another lovely matchbook for the Clift. I think this is just a nice, elegant design. You see some more gas pipe letters here, but here it's not about the lettering. It's more about the composition and the pattern here that spans over to the back of the matchbook itself.
And here you see a photo of the Clift Hotel. This is taken from Nob Hill, looking down towards the Tenderloin. And you can see that the Clift Hotel still has a neon sign up there on the roof alongside, I don't know if that's a penthouse or a utility housing, for the elevators and everything. But also, and it still lights up at night. It's huge. I'm guessing the letters are at least 10 to 12 feet tall. And by contrast, it's a lot more interesting at night than the Hilton sign, which you see to the left of the Clift, which is all plastic and LED.
Here's a great example of color, and pink and brown, not colors that are, maybe they're coming back in vogue now, but this is the kind of style that I think is indicative of the 40s and the 50s. The Jack Tar occupied a square block bounded by Van Ness Avenue, Franklin, Geary, and Post Streets. And it was demolished in 2013, so not too long ago, to make way for Sutter Health Medical Complex.
And here's a shot of some people enjoying the poolside amenities at the Jack Tar Hotel. And the more I look at this photo, I think what's really happening here is a fashion shoot for the latest in drip dry business suits. So,
but
what do you think?
We have to point out that clock that says Jack Tar Hotel. You just don't see that kind of detail outside a building these days. It's this is just very, very much of its era.
This hotel was featured a lot in Francis Ford Coppola's movie, The Conversation, which we're going to talk about a little later too.
Cool. So the old Poodle Dog, we'll hear more about this restaurant from Katie, but this is a rare example of the formal script rather than kind of casual scripts we looked at earlier, and that illustration, just too good. Katie?
Yeah, so the convoluted life and afterlife of the Poodle Dog restaurant has continued to delight historians, collectors, and San Francisco cultural enthusiasts. And the Poodle Dog is a French restaurant that originally opened in 1849. And in what was known as Chinatown, or later, it wasn't known as that at the time. But basically, there have just been many Poodle Dogs in San Francisco. It just became a very popular thing to name a restaurant. And we had menus from some of the Poodle Dogs in our ephemera show, which is when I first found out about this establishment. In 1897, ownership split, and an offshoot called the Original Poodle Dog was open on Mason and Eddy in the Tenderloin. And it was run by Blanco of Blanco's Cafe, which was later known as the Music Box and is now the Great American Music Hall. And the previous restaurant was then renamed the Old Poodle Dog. And the menus of these two places really hinted at the bad blood between them. And the menu of the old Poodle Dog would refer to the original as a pretentious establishment, and they would just go back and forth kind of on their menus. And the Poodle Dog is a great example of what you can learn from history through ephemera. There's a series of business cards, postcards, city listings between 1897 and the 1980s that reveal a web of ownership and affiliation. Basically, there were dozens of Poodle Dog restaurants, and they often, although not always, had some kind of connection to one another. So old, new, original, or otherwise, one thing is clear. For over 100 years, savvy restaurateurs have wanted to tap into the iconic legacy of the Poodle Dog by giving their restaurant this name. And historic references to the Poodle Dog under any of its pre-prohibition names usually mention elegant private suites on the upper floors of the ground floor restaurant. And whatever took place there was never revealed by the owners or staff, all of whom maintain French restaurateur levels of discretion. But we know as a historical fact that many French restaurants were fronts for brothels, and the Poodle Dog was one of many of these.
All right, I have for years wanted to use this photograph in a tour and finally get the opportunity. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the sign. We talked about projecting signs. This is a projecting sign, but we didn't talk about the backboard or the backing for the neon tubing, and that's called a cabinet, or quite often people refer to it as a tin can. I've even heard it referred to as a suitcase. But what's interesting about this one is the fact that the tin can is integrated into the design of the overall sign. It's not a rectangle. It's not a square. It's the sheet metal's been cut in a design style, and
the outside border, the fancy framing, was a very early style for signs that tended to go away later, but it's a very Art Deco style.
Right, and even prior to that, a lot of signage actually was done with what looked like a picture frame around the borders of the sign, and those are now extremely rare and collectible.
But let's talk about what's going on. This photo came from the San Francisco Public Library History Center.
One of our favorite resources is the SFPL History Center. But I'll just read the copy from the old SF Call Bulletin newspaper. This was on July 14th, 1957. Here we go. Bandit trap is set at Post Street entrance of Old Poodle Dog restaurant as police, armed with shotguns and tear gas, await 4 gunmen who held up the cafe. But the 4 robbers escaped through a skylight with $160. In hasty flight, they left behind $920 taken from the cash register and safe. Well, it turns out there were actually 30 policemen had the building surrounded, and these 4 bandits got away through the skylight in the ceiling, scampered across a few rooftops, came down on an adjacent street where they actually stole the car of the owner of the Old Poodle Dog restaurant at the time, a man named Louis Lalonde, and used his car as a getaway car. If they were, I don't know if they were apprehended. I've never been able to trace the story back that far.
That's a Poodle Dog.
I also just love the nonchalant stance of this plainclothes police officer here.
Yeah, I think he either knew they didn't have a chance, or he does this every day, but he's so casual. It's really, it makes the photograph, doesn't it?
All right, moving on to Original Joe's. Many of you may be familiar with this name if you're here in the Bay Area. After 80 years of this location that's advertised here, it was destroyed in a fire, and it's now at Washington Square in North Beach. One of the kind of tropes that I love from matchbook lettering is the large cap or other kind of lettering with what we call in typography the ascender or the descender that kind of spans through the whole composition. And this is a great example of that. And they continued it here onto this design. Also scripts that are at an angle. Those are very common techniques that you'll see in matchbook designs and other kinds of lettering from the mid-century. And here's yet another really nice design. It just kind of shows you the lifespan of original Joe's when you see how many different designs of matchbooks that they went through. And this is kind of the dilemma of the matchbook collector is, you know, how many do we need to find for each of these venues? I think you have something to add here to this one. Is that right?
Yes. Let's see the next slide. There we go. Okay, here, this is a photo by made by a great photographer here in the San Francisco Bay Area named Thomas Hawk. And thank you, Thomas, for allowing us to use this photo. This gives you a good idea of the corner of Taylor and Eddy, which was where Original Joe's was located before the fire shut them down in 2007. And take a look at the sign. You see the chef in the circular part of the sign, and then the two-piece signs below. That was all presented as one unit, but when they moved to, also you'll notice over the doorway, you'll see some script that says Original Joe's, and once again, that's Raceway lettering. But when they moved to North Beach and opened in 2012, they were able to take this sign with them, but because of the design of the building in North Beach and probably maybe a little something to do with codes, they had to break that sign down into 3 different pieces. And in the next slide, you'll see the most prominent piece, which is on the exterior of the building on the Union Street side of the building. And the rest of the sign that we saw in the black and white photo, some of it is on the Stockton Street side of the building, and some of it is actually illuminated and mounted inside the restaurant itself.
So when you're walking around North Beach, it's kind of fun to walk around the building and find all these different little pieces of the sign that was once on is that Jones? Yeah.
Taylor and Eddy.
Taylor and Eddy.
Okay.
And yet again, more matchbooks from Original Joe's and New Joe's.
And thank you, Heather David, for collecting all of these and letting us use them. She's a prolific collector.
Yeah, great Flickr account. I highly recommend following hers. Lots of great matchbooks there. Really love the lettering on the left with that kind of flat extension on the serifs and new, and just the really nice fluid script for Joe's. Some beautiful stuff here. And again, more great illustrations of the storefront itself, the building itself. So this may be the most impressive matchbook that we'll show tonight, just in terms of color. I think I counted 7 different plates here, and that means 7 different inks, 7 different colors used, including a metallic silver, and also just a lovely design. Again, more gas pipe lettering there in the Rainbow Room. This kind of glowing martini glass is another recurring theme that you'll see in other matchbooks as well. And I think that I saw a question in the chat, something about why 7 spot colors, why 7 plates instead of 4 color printing. It's a really good question. I think it comes down to just the effect with 4 color printing, especially at that size. You've got to use some sort of mixing of colors, and it may not get you the effect that you're looking for. There also might be some examples or some reasons behind that in terms of flexography, but I'm not so sure. I think it just gave you a nice bright color for each of these stripes in the rainbow. Now we're going to talk about the lovely history of the blue lamp in San Francisco. Here's an example, though, of a matchbook which where the building itself is kind of the star, or the storefront, or the entrance is the star of the matchbook. And there are a few examples of these in the collection that's in the matchbook, the Tenderloin and mine and other collections. And I think it's just a great example of that. Where is it that I was last night? And you remember it by the look of that entrance, and it spans the whole side of the printed side of the matchbook.
So if we could go back to the other slide.
Sure.
So So the Blue Lamp has always been a part of our matchbook tour, but we didn't really know much about it other than that it was a bar that had live music. And our motivation for researching the Blue Lamp in more depth is Rachel Kushner. So she's the best-selling author and former Blue Lamp bartender and booker. And Rachel writes about working at the Blue Lamp in 2 of her essays in The Hard Crowd, which you're seeing here, which is a collection of nonfiction essays that was released this past May. And you can pick up your own copy at the Tenderloin Museum or SFPL. Rachel's novel, The Mars Room, partially takes place in the Tenderloin, and reading The Hard Crowd, you really get a sense of the Tenderloin landscape she draws from to create fiction. And we recently had the honor of interviewing Rachel about her experiences in the Tenderloin and at the Blue Lamp, which led to interviewing other staff members and musicians that played there. And we compiled these interviews and a performance into a video that premiered on May 6th and is now available on our YouTube page. And so I can share the full interview we did with Rachel Kushner and our Blue Lamp compilation video that features our interview with Rachel, as well as interviews with at least 10 other staff members and musicians. And we're going to screen just 2 short clips from our interview with Rachel Kushner now.
There was this kind of like witching hour between the late afternoon regulars, like the hardcore Tenderloin crowd, and the people who were coming for live music. And it was different every night, the crowd, depending on who was booked there. You know, we had like metal bands, we had punk bands, we had some kind of like classic big bands like Leve Smith and her Red Hot Skillet Lickers. We had like old-timey music with skiffle drum and instruments, and you know, so it just depends on the night. But that crowd was always going to be a different crowd than the regulars. And the 2 of them meeting, it's almost like the freshwater outlet to the sea, and this strange like brackish mix, but in a certain way they understood each other. And you would see like my regular Rick, who drank Bacardi 151 and pushed a walker and just quite frankly fell down a lot and was like a very serious alcoholic. Him sort of telling somebody to get out of his way who was like a hipster with purple hair. It was just a funny mix of people who kind of tolerated one another. And by the end of the night, sometimes if it was a really rocking band, there were people dancing, and the regulars were dancing with these like hipsters from the Mission who were there to see their friend's band play. So yeah, that's Leve Smith. I can't remember her real name, which is not Leve Smith. So they still very much regularly performed at the Blue Lamp when I was working there. And it was really exciting when they did, for a lot of reasons. First of all, she's incredibly talented and so glamorous and has an amazing voice. And she had top-notch musicians playing in her band. It was a multi-set, a multi-piece band. I don't remember, I mean, there might have been 9 or 10 people on stage. They had a very passionate crowd. So when they played, the place was packed, which also, you know, for us, you make really good money when you've got Leve Smith playing. But I think the most important thing about those nights when she and her band played was that she brought an old-fashioned dignity to that bar that almost reinvented what it was right before my eyes. It was not a seedy place. It wasn't about alcoholism and destruction, and the sadder aspects of what it was like to work there somehow vanished in the face of this glamorous woman who was a very serious musician, who brought almost like she traveled with her era, like it was 1923 when she walked into the bar, and she brought that dignity into the room.
So to hear more about these amazing San Francisco characters from the characters themselves, be sure to watch our video. I'll share the link. And while you're there, you can subscribe to our YouTube page. But this is an image of Johnny Nitro, which we're going to hear a little bit more, who's playing at the Blue Lamp. And Al's going to tell us a little bit more about him.
Right. Johnny Nitro was a regular at the Blue Lamp and a lot of other bars around town. He was a regular on some of the blues bars on Grand Avenue as well. And he was a guy who you never saw without a guitar in his hands. You could be on Van Ness Avenue at 1:30 in the afternoon, and here would be Johnny Nitro walking down the street with a guitar in his hand. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2011. He lived in an apartment above the saloon on Grand Avenue in North Beach. And he passed away while a blues band was wailing away downstairs in the bar. So I guess he went out in true blues fashion.
That's great. Thank you for those stories. So we're going to sadly leave the Tenderloin and move up Market Street to Union Square and look at a few spots there, including the magnificent Bernstein's Fish Grotto with these awesome characters. The foods that you could eat there apparently are also in their own little show. And I think it is also pretty amazing when you think of this spot, besides yet another character there mixing the drink, famous cuckoo cocktails, that you look on the other side of the matchbook and you see this ship coming out of the facade of the building, and you might think, well, this is just some fantastical idea of what the restaurant could be, but then you see a photograph and you realize that was really what it looked like to enter the Fish Grotto. And here's some beautiful neon on the other side.
Now, here we have a photo of Bernstein's, and the ship was modeled after Christopher Columbus's Nina. And if you look, you can see the neon ropes that lead up to the sail, which is the cabinet of the sign was integrated into the overall design, and it basically served as the sail for the ship. Lots of neon in this photograph.
A little precariously placed for sale, but effective.
You got to work with what you have, I guess, you know. And I always like the small neon sign on the left that says shore lunches. So if you were not into seafood, you could get something else that was more land-based. And this photo comes from a great website called shortbeat.com. Lots of history from lots of places around the United States, and a lot of San Francisco history can be found on shortbeat.com.
Now we're moving on to Macombo Club, and again, this kind of what might be termed exotic lettering with the logo here, and giving you a sense of the ambiance that you might experience as you enter the club.
One of the things I really love about this, if you look way in the just about halfway up the street, you can see the Macombo, but above that is Bernstein's, and you can see kind of the triangle of that sail. And I love that you could stumble out of Bernstein, stumble out of the ship, go to the Macombo Club, like leaving the ship and going right to the island. I wish we could still do that.
And also, if you look on the corner, you'll see the sign that is advertising White Rock sparkling water. That sign might be familiar to a lot of people in the audience as the old Marquard's newsstand sign. It was basically, this was removed and replaced with Marquard's signage. They kept some of the signage, as you can see, liquor, cigars, magazines. They kept that, but they did change the name to Marquard's. They were there until 2004, and soon after that, all the glass tubing was removed from the sign, and it has since been painted solid black. The plan is for a long-term leaser to take over the spot at some point. There's a hat shop in there now, but at some point, I think the city is on board with this plan as well. To a new business would come in and install neon and repurpose the sign, but it would be a neon sign. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that happens. Also, the clock advert at one point, there was some neon added around the crown or the top of the clock that said the New York Times.
So Britex Fabrics is, a San Francisco institution, and one of the things that makes this matchbook so great for me is that the logo of Britex, which was also the sign, is such a part of its identity. This really interesting kind of Art Nouveau or Jugendstil style lettering, and that's actually not lettering. It comes from a typeface from the early 20th century called Franconia, this German typeface from that era of Art Nouveau. And just kind of it has that kind of wrapping flow of what you might think of with a fabric. It works so well for this logo and for the sign, even when you curve it around the very iconic entrance of the original location of Britex.
Okay, so this is the original sign that used to hang right above that original entrance. And
yeah, and the sign is still there. The building's being renovated, and Britex has since moved to Post Street, where they commission a smaller version of this sign to be mounted on the building. This sign was so big that even if they were allowed to take it with them, it wasn't going to work on the building. They're occupying on Post Street because there's so much of a glass facade on the building.
And so it was Arrow Sign Shop built a replica.
Yeah, there was a man named Martin Spector who opened Britex Fabrics. He had come to San Francisco with his wife for a vacation in about 1950 or 51 or 52, and they just fell in love with San Francisco. They went back to New York City and closed their fabric shop and moved to San Francisco and opened Britex in 1952. And today, the business is still in the family. It's run by Martin's daughter, Charmin.
And in that black and white photo there, you can see that as big as the Britex sign is, the city of Paris was huge. And that is a neon Eiffel Tower. It was the coolest thing on Union Square. And even though there was a huge movement in the city to save it in the 70s, they were not successful, and that sign came down. Where can you see that sign in a movie?
Oh, yeah, we talked about Francis Ford Coppola's movie called The Conversation. Some of the opening shots are filmed around Union Square, and there are some great cameos of the City of Paris sign in that movie. The building was torn down in 1981. The sign probably went up in the late 40s. It's a shame the whole thing is gone, but it was a massive sign, so I really don't know where it could have been stored. And it could have.
We don't know. It's a mystery.
So here's Charlotte's Fine Food. We don't know a lot about this restaurant. If you do, then please tell us in the chat. But this is just a wonderful example of San Francisco typography in an illustration on a matchbook, and a little story being told just here on this tiny little 4-inch or 3.5-inch wide piece of advertising. Love this illustration. Golden Pheasant, it was at this location from 1922 to 1954. I have a couple of really lovely matchbooks from the Golden Pheasant, but I like this one for this kind of Art Deco style lettering and the really lovely use of color, the 3 different colors plus the gold metallic here. And here is the location at Geary and Powell. And a little bit later on a postcard in that kind of a different kind of upright script lettering style. That's lovely. Melody Lane, this was a bar on 729 Bush Street at Powell. And what a great piece of illustration as well, and lettering. Those E's in Melody Lane are really nice, just kind of a two-stroke E. And what you're seeing here with the bartender winking, reflecting the cover with the piano player winking, and then the backdrop, the stage with that little village, it was actually replicating what was in the bar itself.
That's right. And on the photo on the right, you see the band on stage. And again, I've got some news copy for you. Here we go. Entertainment Deluxe is the order of the day at Melody Lane, 729 Bush Street. In the above photograph, Larry Larson is shown passing the portable mic to co-owner Margaret Peterson, while the three naturals, left to right, Mikey Conte, Bobby Garay, and Sek Schmorl, provide some tuneful music. If I'm not mistaken, Melody Lane at some point ended up being the Nob Hill Cinema, which had closed in the last few years as well. It's vacant right now.
Carl Wilka, there must have been multiple locations throughout San Francisco. This is just a really nice example of Art Deco lettering, metallic ink, and just a purely typographic or lettering based matchbook. No illustration here, but it still has a really nice effect, especially as it spans the whole length of the cardboard. And here's a sign for one of the locations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we have something to say. You say it.
Well, it's just a simple neon sign. Again, a projecting sign on, I believe that's Market Street.
Looks like it.
Yeah.
I don't know, Randall, do you have
Yeah,
anything
I
else
think
to add?
that's the Hearst building actually right behind it. So this, yeah, so this is leading up to Market Street. Well, it's a great look at the difference. The small mom and pop places have the small signs that you really are meant to be seen by street traffic and pedestrians, and the bigger tall blade signs were almost always national brands and were meant to be seen from cars. So
Right.
that's the scale of this ephemera.
And in most cases, the smaller signs were much more charming than
Yeah,
the big,
absolutely.
massive, spectacular signs.
Nice, great point. Here is the Beverly Plaza Hotel and its cocktail lounge, the Pan Americana. This is near the Chinatown Dragon Gate. It's now the Triton Hotel. But again, when thinking back to the slide about flexography, you really see that in the words cocktail lounge here. You see the evidence of that halo effect. But I just love the lettering in Pan Americana. If you're a type designer or a lettering artist, or you love that stuff, here's some really great source material. This is kind of this very rough brush that you don't really see in a lot of other lettering.
And there we have the Beverly Hotel. I believe that tin can is still there, but now it's called
the
Triton.
Triton Hotel. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's at Bush and Union, or Bush and Grant.
And you just gotta love these photographs. Like Open SF History has amazing amount of these color photographs, and they gotta be somebody's uncle. I always try to figure out what the pose is here.
Right.
And
And
I
again,
got the URL wrong. I apologize on that credit. This
That's all right.
Open SF History, and I think there's a link in chat.
yeah, Open SF History is just a treasure trove of amazing images and information.
It rivals the History Center's historic photos.
So now we're going to move up to the financial district and Soma in that area. And here's a really classy matchbook, just a lovely illustration of the corner there of Breen's Cafe. And the script down here with the slogan, "You're welcome as flowers in May." I think Randall, Ann, and Al have a reaction to that because this was a place they were familiar with. But it's also an example of a matchbook illustration reflecting that facade in a really nice way as you remember it, so you can remember it.
Yeah, this was a corner where we spent a lot of time when we were art students and worked downtown, and Breen's was a really bustling cigar-filled bar, but it had a great steam table lunch counter in the back, which is where we went for lunch almost every day when we worked in this neighborhood. And at night, it just lit up in neon. Breen's was really quite an amazing place. And right next door to it was this place, Jerry and Johnny's, which is also where we used to hang out. And that's actually us drinking beer in our 20s.
Early 20s.
Very early 20s. But one of the things that was so great about this bar is that the guy who ran it, Jerry Hansen, was our pal, and he would also cash our checks. Like, that was really what San Francisco was like in the 70s. And he knew that if he cashed our checks, we would buy a few beers, but also he just really created community with everybody who was there. Breen's was a little fancier, and that was a little artier. Upstairs was the Museum of Conceptual Art, and Breen's was the reception hall. But we were down at Jerry and Johnny's hanging out.
Right, and Jerry and Johnny's had been a really popular watering hole for people who work for the newspapers in that area, the Chronicle and the Examiner. This was one of their hangouts. They had more than one, but this was a popular spot.
I think that's really interesting what you said, Randall, about how these places were not just bars, and often they aren't just bars. They are a kind of community center, and there were a lot of other services that they could provide. I think that's
like great. This was our blue lamp. I mean, really, every dive. This was a whole culture in San Francisco and lots of other cities too, where your community was at the Long Bar. And of course, what we laugh about, this was a girly matchbook. And of course, there was nobody that looked like that girly in that bar ever. But I guess it like you said, it basically the idea is that you pick it up and take it with you. And the next day you remember.
Or you find it and you say, I've got to go to this place.
Yeah.
Love the slogan too.
Yeah.
And this was a photographer's bar. It was so close to the Chronicle, and all the photographers would bring in their best prints and tape it to the wall. So it's really quite a place.
So Monk Young's don't know a lot about this bar. Monk Young, though, was the founder of Bimbo's 365, which we'll talk about later. But this particular bar may not have been around for very long, but I really just want you to savor the illustration, the lettering here, that nice shadow on Young's, and the way that Monk fits right in the swash of the Y. And also just this patterning on the facade of the entrance. I don't know if that really reflected what it looked like, but it's such a cool way to add some interest using, again, just these three colors, this metallic gold, red, and black, and just a lovely effect in a tiny little illustration. Sam's Grill, here is another example of halftone effect at its best. This is a single color matchbook, just blue being used here on white paper, but you get the grayscale effect with that halftone dot pattern. And a nice casual script and gas pipe lettering there on the reverse side. And then here is another Sam's Grill, and here you see two examples of the same venue, but two different matchbooks, one using flexography on the left and one using offset printing. And the flexography one had three colors, so they had more money to spend at that time, apparently.
And here you see a small vertical sign for Sam's Grill. Sign is still there. It lights up every night. And it's a very basic sign. And they have also recently, right before the pandemic, branched out into the building next door. I think we have a slide of that as well. And opened up Sam's Tavern. Now, Sam's is the fifth oldest restaurant in the United States. It opened in 1867. It opened at a location on Kearny Street, which was called the California Market. It was an open air food emporium. And eventually, after a few other locations, ended up on Bush Street, where it is now, right below Kearny. Still there. The neon, the tubes were bent by a tube bender named Dan Cuppy, who has a shop on Treasure Island. And I'll give you some inside information. Next time you go through the Stockton Tunnel and you see the Quiet Through Tunnel sign, Dan also did the tube bending for that sign.
Oh, very cool. That's good to know. I've always wondered about that. I also just need to draw people's attention to this apostrophe. When you think about neon tubes being connected, and you have to black out those connections, I think it's really cool the way that they continued that tube stroke by just twisting around to create the apostrophe. There's such an art and craft to turning letters that may have been initially drawn or just conceived into a continuous glass tube. And I think this is a really nice example of that.
Yeah, it's like for tube benders, every job is a different puzzle to solve. And it's interesting to see how different tube benders approach the same challenges, different way, like a possessive apostrophe. There are a number of ways it can be done. And it's always fascinating to see how that particular tube bender decided to do it.
Absolutely. Here's Foster's, and really nice little illustration of the front there with the awning, and another great slogan, Architects of Appetites. We just noticed this one last night the other day when we were rehearsing. And also the sign of pure food. So if you don't want any of that adulterated food, then you should get on over to Foster's.
Yeah, this was a common sight in San Francisco that's almost a full story Foster's.
This is at Mission and First Streets, right?
Yeah, but there was one at Van Ness, there was one on Polk Street.
Geary and Kearny. Yeah, they were all over town.
And this is what we call multi-channel letters. It's not just one single tube of neon that forms a letter, but it's so big that you need three tubes to fill the letter in.
So now we'll venture past the financial district into Chinatown and take a trip to the magnificent Lipo Lounge.
This is the poster child for neon restoration, and we're so proud to have been involved in this project, which was funded by a group in the city called SF Shines, and it's for storefront enhancement. And so it was a grant, and the Lipo sign is so unusual because it's a three-dimensional Chinese lantern, and it's outlined in neon, and then that's actually gold glass that spells Lipo. And once again, the Arrow Sign Company restored this. So we thank Lipo for being the first business on Grand Avenue to have their sign restored. And it's just kind of interesting to see that it has every kind of classic glass, and we made those choices very purposefully. So the outline of the lamp is neon. The lettering is gold glass, which has neon in it. But then the green arrow is green glass, and the word cocktails is clear glass with argon in it. And these are all considered classic colors before they invented phosphor coating for tubes, and then you could get a whole rainbow array of colors. So Lipo is looking pretty classic there.
It's so good. Congratulations on this. It's really lovely. Here's another venue in Chinatown. This is a stock design, but a fun one with that kind of leaning deco or kind of mid-century deco S.
I have a real soft spot for leaning forward S's.
And then a little bit further out, the Tonga Room, a very well-known institution in San Francisco in the Fairmont Hotel. Again, this kind of loose brush lettering to evoke the islands of Polynesia, perhaps. And even in the neon sign itself, that style of lettering was replicated. Kind of hard to see in this image, but a really nice image to give you a sense of the street where Fairmont is. And for those of you who haven't been there, let Al tell you a little bit about it.
Well, it's a fun place to go. It attracts a lot of tourists, but it also attracts a lot of locals. I think we've had more birthday parties there than we care to remember. And
I can remember.
yeah,
And it rains.
it rains every 20 minutes, thunder, lightning, and rain on schedule. So you get a lot of island atmosphere without having to leave town. And if you look in the back in this photo, in the background, you see the floating stage on what was actually a swimming pool at one point. Well, they still use that, and the band comes out, and the stage is pulled out into the center of the pool, and some things never change. You can see in this photo, the bar was more designed as a almost as a ship, but it's since, for the last 40 years or more, maybe it's been a true tiki bar motif.
And yet again, another matchbook from the Tonga Room, Island Dining, and as close to island dining as you can get without getting to an island, as you heard. Kind of in that same theme, it's the Zebra Room at the Huntington Hotel. Just really love the pattern on this and how they've extended that, the full length of the match cover, and also the lettering. Another kind of cool gas pipe mixed with some other deco style letters that you don't see very often. A little about the Huntington Hotel sign.
Yeah, high up on Nob Hill, we've got one of the last remaining roof signs or scaffold signs or sky sign, you can call it whatever you like, that exist in the city.
That's still neon.
That is still neon, right. And the Huntington Hotel actually had an interesting history. It was built in 1922 by the architectural firm of Weeks and Day, who did a lot of work on the West Coast. And they actually built it as the Huntington Apartments. But in 1924, just 2 years after it opened, a real estate developer named Eugene Fritz, he bought the building and he converted it to a hotel. And his grandchildren, his family, ending up with his grandchildren, ran the hotel until they sold it to a Singapore-based company called Grace International in 2014. It was closed for about a year. It reopened in 2015 as the Scarlet Huntington. So it's still a hotel. They went through a $15 million renovation before they opened it. So, but the sign is still neon, and like I say, one of the last remaining roof signs in the city. You've also got the Palace Hotel and maybe one or two others, but that's it.
Now moving on for the last of our two neighborhoods, we'll venture into North Beach and Little Italy and look at this, what I believe is what we'd call a 10-striker matchbook. Collectors talk about the size of the matchbooks, how many matches are in each book by either a 10, a 20, a 30 striker. And this is one of those really narrow matchbooks where you have this just 10 matches inside, I believe. Some really nice inline letters here and a cool triangular A, which is replicated in Tabarin. It opened in 1931, and it was famous for its Art Deco facade and interior, which we'll see a little bit later. And you actually may recognize this building because some of this front was maintained when the club was renamed. So the locals in the audience may know what club we're talking about.
Bimbos. And you can see how cleverly they just changed the BAL to 365.
That's right. There's an interior shot of the bar.
And all this interior is redone by a really famous architect named Timothy Pfluger. And you can see his touches all over the interior.
Right. And one of the things he did was to install basically a suspended ceiling. So it eliminated structural columns. So you had there were no obstructed views.
I think next slide, we'll see the dance floor. There you go. There it is. No columns, no obstructed views.
Right. And Bimbo's opened in 1931. It actually opened on Market Street, which was the same year that the Bow Tavern opened on Columbus. But and we talked about Young's restaurant and the owner, Monk Young. He was Bimbo's partner. Bimbo's name was actually Agostino Giuntoli, but boss Monk Young couldn't pronounce it, so he called him Bimbo, which translates as boy in Italian. So, and I guess Bimbo was okay with that. And then he really ran with the whole 365 theme. They were open 365 days a year. The special dinner, or the world's best dinner, as it was known, was $3.65. So he got a lot of mileage out of the name of the club.
And what an exuberant matchbook.
It was also a huge hotspot during Prohibition while it was still on Market Street. It was apparently the place to go.
And
first, we have to talk about Delfina, as who you see this rendering of Delfina riding the fish. Basically, Bimbo's was famous for the nude swimmer in the fish tank, which actually it was an illusion.
It was
all done with mirrors and models. But so Delfina never really did get wet.
Okay, let's keep going.
Two versions of that matchbook, one from Alan Randall's collection, one from mine, giving you a sense of just the change of the name here. So it went from theater, restaurant to club, but otherwise very similar design. Another thing to keep in mind here, though, if you're collecting matchbooks, is one way to date the matchbooks is by whether it is a so-called backstriker or not a backstriker. So you see the striking plate there at the bottom. That means that it's an older matchbook because it was before they instituted this safety device of having the striking more on the inside flap there. So that second one is a newer matchbook. Usually around 1970 is when they made that change. So you can kind of date your collection that way. The Beige Room, this just not only an incredible design, but also a really interesting San Francisco story. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll go very quickly through this, but the Beige Room was opened in 1949, closed in 58. It was on 831 Broadway and was one of the first gay drag clubs in San Francisco. Amazing lettering and illustration, composition here. And unlike other kind of drag clubs that were more for tourists and more of a spectacle for outsiders, this was a strictly gay club, and the female impersonators were mostly gay. And there's a great collection of these photographs and ephemera on foundsf.org, which I highly recommend you checking out, where it talks a little bit more about the Beige Room. They often had wild after-hour parties, and many of San Francisco's high society were seen there on special occasions. It's got a really interesting history that you should go and check out at queermusicheritage.com and foundsf.org. Earthquake Nagoons was the longest running traditional jazz club in San Francisco between 1960 and 1984. The featured act was Turk Murphy's San Francisco Jazz Band, and it exposed many thousands to that style of Dixie jazz. And this character that you see over here is Turk Murphy himself. The club was named after a character in Al Cap's Little Abner comic strip. And Cap gave Turk Murphy the permission to use the name as long as you keep your nose clean and play good jazz, he said. Ward Kimball, the Disney animator, who was also a trombonist and the leader of the Firehouse 5+2 band, was a longtime friend of Turk's and designed the logo and this cartoon rendering of Turk, which you see photographed on the cover of that album there on the right. And he's holding a pail containing a mangled trombone, and the tagline is that you would often see next to this illustration was, "I just happened to bring my horn." This is another Earthquake Magoons, totally different design, but I really love this as a representative of this kind of hand lettering slash kind of nouveau Victorian style that was really common in the 1970s, especially in San Francisco. And I just really like that this is just a single color design, but really ornamental and interesting, all illustrated in a single kind of composition, bringing both the ornamentation and the lettering together. This is a red metallic paper. Actually, I have two versions of this matchbook. This one's just a single solid red, but there's also a metallic red, and that one's very hard to scan, but one that's worth looking at in person. This location here is replaced with a residential building, for those of you who know 886 Broadway. But that Alfred's that you see in the script there at the top was produced as a single tube in neon. So there's this really beautiful piece right here. And here it is from another really fun video, which we'll see a little clip of.
Nightlife in San Francisco sets a very high standard, and you first realize it when you get your check. This used to be the old Barbary Coast. Today it's pretty tame, but it's still one place, if you're on the loose, you can really get tight.
So the Barbary Coast, then renamed the International Settlement, which you saw that lovely neon entrance to that street, held the Monaco Theater restaurant. This opened in 1939 and closed before 1950, but this is one of the more magnificent matchbooks that I've seen. It's in my collection, both in terms of the color and the design. Really great late Art Deco style. It was the former venue of the Hippodrome, which also has a really magnificent history of its own. Not one that we have time to get into, but good for you to check out. And here that you saw in that little clip is the International Settlement, the street on which the Monaco resided. Del Vecchio's, unfortunately now this is the kind of boring facade of the Centerfold Strip Club, but at the time it was this cool restaurant. And a really nice example of kind of turning letters into illustration.
That's cutlery typography, right?
Thank you. I didn't know that term, but now I do. So North Beach, we're moving on into Fisherman's Wharf for the final leg of the tour. Thanks for hanging with us. Alioto's, a really nice illustration here, which is not giving you a sense of the front of the building, but what it's like to actually be inside dining at the restaurant on Fisherman's Wharf. Also a really beautiful number 8, that kind of twisted letter style.
Alioto's, what I love, well, one, it's a gigantic fish. It's almost as wide as the storefront, but look at those letter forms. I think that they each have a bubble inside them. I've never really seen letter forms quite like this with the little center bulge, but you got to love the neon fish.
And this is number 9, Fisherman's Grotto. Another great neon sign, pretty extravagant. I guess these are rooftop signs. I never really thought about it that way. But you might not know that the number 8 for Alioto's and number 9 for Fisherman's Grotto, when these became full-service restaurants, they replaced the original stalls, like the seafood stalls that the Alioto's had and the people from Fisherman's Grotto. And their stalls were just numbered, like stall number 8 and stall number 9. So when they became restaurants, they just carried the address with them.
And then they made a big sign with flashing incandescent bulbs and neon. I just love that big 9.
And the conversion from canvas sided seafood stall to restaurant, at least for Fisherman's Grotto, took place in 1935. So this is old signage. It's still there, and most of it lights up. but just gives you an idea of the durability of neon in spite of the fact that a major part of it is made of glass.
Absolutely. So the Bel Air Club, another beautiful matchbook. And again, this recurring theme of the glowing martini glass. We've seen that before with the rainbow.
It's frosty. They're both so frosty.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not glowing, it's frosty. Thank you. And the Buena Vista, many of you know, long time establishment there in that Marina district. And I love this matchbook. I think it's from 1980s illustration of the steep hill on one on Hyde there, and the trolley or the cable car coming down the hill, and the neon sign, which has changed over time. But here's kind of what we would call in typography an uncial style, which has its basis in kind of medieval England.
And we think that's the same metal cabinet, and it's just been reworked a little bit.
Yeah, you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't tell people that the first Irish coffee drink in the United States was served at the Buena Vista in 1952. You can see the bartenders in the photo on the left lining up all the Irish coffees, you know, that will be served. And in the photo on the right, take a good look at that cable car, because what you're seeing there is what was called a California style, like for California Street, double-ended cable car, because before the Powell Hyde cable car line was developed and opened in 1957, there was no cable car turnaround. A cable car turnaround now would be positioned directly, slightly to the left of the cable car itself. But up until 57, there was no turnabout there. So they used the double-ended cars like they used on the California Street line.
And we're always on the lookout for transit photographs, because where there's transit, there's signs.
Great point.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of transit, maybe not the kind of transit you were talking about, but car transit, the Otts Drive-In. We don't know much about this establishment, but a really fun matchbook, both in terms of, again, letter as illustration with the chef there in Otts, both in the sign and the lettering on the matchbook, and also kind of the mid-century amorphous blob that are sometimes known as fried eggs there with the clouds. And here is the only photo we found so far of Otts, and with a totally different, not as interesting sign, but it looks to be neon. And it was a drive-in, not many drive-ins in San Francisco. So we'd love to know more about that, and for those of you who know it.
I think we're in the home stretch, right?
That's it. That was our last one. And I just wanted to say, you know, this is only one part of the city. Randall and Al have really done incredible tours and research, both in San Francisco and in the East Bay. So we hope to do more of these in the future.
And we do have something big coming up. Neon Speaks is now an international online symposium all about neon and its creative legacy. So save the dates. That's going to be September 11, 12. And go to neonspeaks.org, find out all about it.
Yeah, this will be the 4th year we've been fortunate enough to do Neon Speaks. So please join us.
Yeah, you get to hear from a lot more people who know about neon. And thank you for joining us tonight. Do we have questions?
Yeah, I know we're a little short on time, but we do have 2 great questions in the Q&A field. So let's stick with those maybe. Is gas pipe a font, or just the name of a style of type that's styled after metal or neon lettering?
Good question. There isn't a typeface or a font called gas pipe. There are a lot that are in that style, and I'll drop a link into the chat later, and you can find some fonts in that style. But it is just a style of lettering initially, and then there were more typefaces that were inspired by it.
So what kind of inks were used to print these matchbooks? That silver on the Rainbow Room matchbook was amazing.
Yeah, I unfortunately am not an expert in ink or printing. So what I told you is as much as I know about that. But it is true when they use those metallic inks, either silver or gold, added another dimension that was really interesting. But I think in the flexography, you did get some more opaque inks than you would get in traditional 4-color printing. So that kind of answered that other question before. It was really about getting more, saturation in the matchbook.
Another thing about ink and printing is that now we always it's great. We have lead-free inks, soy-based inks. Well, the lead-based inks were so saturated and opaque and beautiful colors, which really is like half the charm of these matchbooks. So it was the lead that made it so beautiful.
It's kind of interesting you say that, because it's the same thing with neon signs and the background painting on neon signs on the cabinets.
It was lead-based paint.
In fact, even the glass had a lead component to it, which is no longer manufactured. And the leaded glass was easier to work with, but much more hazardous to your health.
All right.
And Randall and Al threw in this amazing.
Thank you, Rich Green, for sending this. Yeah.
Because it combined both neon sign making and matchbooks. This is a wonderful piece.
So basically, that if you don't maintain your neon sign, it's going to look like a wino on a bender. And if you maintain your sign, you'll look like you just stepped out of the haberdashery. This has been so much fun. We really appreciate everybody sticking around so long and such a great turnout. And we'd love to see you at the next SFPL event, which is the 25th of August.
That's right, in August. So we'd like to a deep or sincere thank you to Stephen for all the great work he did on this and just giving a great presentation. And thanks to Anissa and Lisa at the San Francisco Public Library for inviting us and shepherding through the whole evening. Thank you, Katie Conry. Always a pleasure to work with you. And I'd like to thank the audience for staying with us tonight. It's amazing how many of you stuck around for the entire presentation. So we really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
And again, I'll just shout out all the links from tonight as they were going are in that link that I just put in the chat box. And yes, you can watch this again on YouTube. So friends, thank you so much. And thank you, Tenderloin Museum, Katie, Stephen, Letterform Archive, and Randall and Al. Thank you so much. We'll see you again, library community. Good night.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you.